So welcome so much to this session about making work during COVID. My name is Madeline O'Reilly. I'm artist support with Absolutely Cultured. Just to audio describe, I've got a lot of thick blonde hair and I'm wearing a green shirt today. So thank you so much for coming and joining us today. The aim of today's session is that we want to kind of hear people's stories about how they've been making work during COVID. What are the key learnings that people have had, and then sort of to offer the opportunity to kind of ask questions and maybe have a discussion towards the end about what are the challenges and what are the opportunities as we continue to make work in this crazy world of COVID and different levels of lockdown and tier restrictions and things like that. We are going to be recording this entire session. And that's in order for us to be able to share it as a resource after the session. So if you would like during the session to put your camera, to turn your camera off or to put your sound on mute, just so that you don't have to look at yourself listening during the first part of the session, that would be brilliant. The way that the session is going to run is I'm sort of doing a lovely introduction at the moment, and then I'm going to hand over to our speakers. So today we've got Chris Clay from Dock Street Events, who's going to kick us off, and then we're going to be followed by Tamar and Joe who are doing doorstep dances, waving just there. Then I'm going to hand over to Alex Bradshaw from Opera North, and then we're going to hand over to Jessica Elmal, who's a visual artist. At the end of that, we're going to open it up for sort of questions, answers, and a discussion. So if you do have questions during the session, please feel free to put them into the chat or write them down, and then we'll have a quite a lively discussion towards the end of the session. Is that all right with everybody? Brilliant. I'm seeing loads and loads of thumbs up. So without further ado, I'd love to hand over to Chris.
Thanks, Madeline. I'm just going to share my screen. While I'm doing that, just by way of audio description, I'm sat in my my home office with very short hair because I gave myself a lockdown DIY haircut yesterday. It was getting a bit ridiculous, and I'm wearing a blue shirt. And good start. So hopefully you can see a photo of Andy Train on your screens. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the events that we've been fortunate enough to be involved with over this year, what we've learned from those events, and share some resources with you, which I hope you might find useful in your own work. Because some of you know what we do at Dock Street Events. We're primarily a kind of event management production company. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about are some of the sort of practical challenges that we faced this year. So the first event I just want to touch on is the We Make Events activations, which we did 2 of this year, along with our friends at HPSS. Some of you may have joined us for those. I hope you did. And one of the key things about this event was we learned about the engagement with the police was very key, and with the safety advisory group. And I think that's a theme that's run through all our work this year, is the importance of kind of really early planning and consultation with the authorities so that they're comfortable with what you're doing. We also made this a booking only event. So we used Eventbrite for pre-booking, set a very strict capacity. And that was something that made the police comfortable with what we were doing going forward, because they knew we were going to have manageable numbers. And also one of the key things we've learned is to set out expectations, both for your fellow artists, any crew you're working with, but also with the public and the attendees, so that people know what to expect when they come to an event. So the next one I want to touch on is Assemble the Caravan, which we did with Madeline. It was her idea, and she produced the event, and we helped with the technical delivery. And this was really about bringing a show to an audience, because at the time, this was back in July, it was very challenging. The theatres hadn't reopened by this point, and not much was happening. So what we tried to do was take a show to the audience. There were some concerns because of the processional nature of the show that people might try to follow it, So we did very little publicity for it, and actually all we did was leaflet people who lived in the area the night before, asked them to come out of their houses at the appropriate time. So in that way, we were kind of able to control the numbers of people who might come to the event. And to try and prevent people from following it, we also made it a hybrid online event. So the whole thing was streamed. Andy, again, appearing here, he was our online host. So it meant that people could watch the caravan going around online. They could then step out of their houses, enjoy it as it passed, and then continue watching it for the rest of the evening. So the next one we did earlier in the year again was some research and development, and this was down on a windy airfield in Exeter. A group of us came together to test fly an enormous kite. I can't really tell you why, except to say that it's involved in an event which has just been greenlit yesterday for August next year. And I made a really key learning from this. It was a group of people who had worked together previously, but we hadn't seen each other for months for obvious reasons. And this was our sort of safety briefing on day one, and you can see that everybody's nicely socially distant. But what we found was, as people got into the old familiar ways of working, that all started to slip. So one of the key learnings is you have to keep on top of these things. You have to keep reminding people. And we then started to put in very regular briefings, because people very quickly got back into their old ways, particularly when they're working with people they know. And these next set of images are from the University of Hull Welcome Fest. And this was the Freshers Week, which we were brought in to help produce and deliver. And what we did with this event was, initially we started to look at how we can take as much online as possible, and also hybrid events. We were able to bring people together for some live events, as you can see, but we also recognised that a lot of the potential audience might not feel comfortable being in a group of people. They might not be able to. I think there were a lot of overseas students who at that time were having to self-isolate for a period of time once they'd arrived in the UK and arrived at the university. So things like we put online yoga, we had quizzes that were taking place both in person but also virtually. We had online DJs, Netflix parties, that kind of thing. And we also introduced, for all the events that were taking place in person, online ticketing only, which meant that we were able to book time slots for people. And that was something that we found very useful in controlling people arriving or leaving an event site. Is if you give them a time slot, it really helps control your queuing and control the amount of people who are gathering at one time. And as you can see from some of these photos, we also put on an outdoor cinema, and we also put on some outdoor gigs. I just want to tell you about some of the practical measures that we found that we had to put in place, which hopefully you might find useful for your own work. What we learned is you're going to need more space than you had before, or you're going to need fewer people. You're going to need more time to do everything. The more time you give yourselves, the more you're able to reduce interactions between people. So for a build that would have probably taken us about a day under normal circumstances, we did over about 2.5 days. So that, for example, the screen was built, then the stage was built, then the lighting crew came in, then the sound crew came in. And what it meant was they never actually met each other on site. So we were able to reduce the risk of transmission between groups in that way. Same with all the bands and artists. We staggered all their sound checks, so we only had one band on site at any one time. We had bigger and more dressing rooms than we normally would have done. Everything was cleaned and sanitized. So each band had a whole different set of microphones. We gave ourselves longer to do the changeovers. So everything was about more time and more space. And then in terms of the audience, you can see from this image that they were all in their pens. We call them pods. We thought it sounded a bit nicer than pens, but people could book online in a group of 2, 3 or 4 people for a pen. They were given a timed arrival slot, as I said, so that we were able to fill the space from the front to the back, and then we did the reverse at the end. So on egress, we used the screens to give out messages, and the steward spoke to people, and we asked them to stay in their place once the event had finished until we were ready to ask them to leave, so that we basically cleared the site from the back to the front, again, completely minimizing how people were passing each other or coming into contact with each other. And we put in a one-way system so that people were always going from right to left across the event site, and always only travelling front to back along designated aisles. And then after each event, massive cleanup. Everything was sanitised, all the seats, all the barriers, everything that anyone might have touched were all cleaned up, ready for the next event. And on social distancing, I think one of the slide issue, there we go. One thing that I've seen a lot of are people thinking, well, I just have to keep everyone 2 meters apart. But what you also need to think about is how people move through the space. And this could be your event staff, your stewards, it could be other members of the audience. So we'd spaced everything out. You probably can't quite see the numbers there, but we put everything at slightly over 2 meters, so that anyone who was walking past was then 1 meter plus, wearing a face covering. It meant that we were still complying with the social distancing. And I've seen, to be honest, quite a few plans where people have, you see dots of people 2 meters apart. Actually, you have to think about people get to and from that. So you have to think about how people move around as well. These are some web links and resources. You'll be able to get these if you look back at the recording. But I just wanted to point out there's a lot of really good help out there. And the one I would point everyone to, probably as a starting point if you're planning to make some work, is the Event Industry Forum. They've produced some guidance which has been done in conjunction with the DCMS, Public Health England and the Health and Safety Executive. It's regularly updated. Every time you look at it, they very kindly highlight in yellow anything that's new. And it's got some really good advice about how you can keep yourselves safe, how you can keep your fellow artists and collaborators safe, and how you can keep the public safe. There's also a lot on the government website, the Health and Safety Executive website, and also industry organisations like the Association of British Theatre Technicians, the PSA, the Production Services Association, and occupational safety and health bodies like IOSH. And there's a wealth of information out there. And all these organisations have actually been fantastic over this year about freely sharing information for their members and non-members. So really, just to recap on, I think, some of the key things that I've learnt this year are gathering your information and get it from reliable sources, because I think we all know that social media is rife with nonsense. But I've seen in some of the groups that I'm in quite a few Facebook groups that are industry based, and people are coming out with rubbish, quite frankly. People have been posting earlier in the year, oh, all events are banned, at a time when actually a lot of events were able to go ahead. So make sure you're getting info from reliable sources and keep yourself updated, because things do change and tier levels change. And I know that's been a really difficult thing for people over the last few months, but keep up to date. Do your planning early, do your consultation early. Safety advisory groups, Public Health England, the police, they will all be keen to help you. But if you involve them earlier, you're more likely to be able to go ahead with your event. I think the vaccine rollout is fantastic news, but I think the reality is that social distancing is going to be with us for a long time to come. And what we're finding now for next year, there's a number of events that we're planning with our clients at the moment, and a lot of them we're planning version A and version B side by side. Version A being the let's hope we can do it how we want to do it, but version B being that if we still have social distancing, what is this event going to look like? Risk assessment, it's a legal requirement to carry out COVID-19 risk assessment. And it's always worth remembering that some groups and some people are more vulnerable to COVID than others, so you have to consider them. And I would just put out a plea as well that all the old risks are still there. A lot of people I've seen are just thinking about COVID, and they get so wrapped up in thinking about COVID, they forget about everything else. I mean, sadly, we lost 2 of our shows at the university, one to torrential rain, it just made it unsafe. And the second one, again, for safety reasons, we had an electrical storm. So remember, all the old risks are still there. And it helps to write a COVID-19 policy. This can just be a very simple statement of intent. It's a good thing to share with, you can share it with your audiences, you can share it with your colleagues. It doesn't have to be as detailed as a risk assessment. It can just set out the steps very clearly that says, remember to sanitize your hands. We need you to wear a face covering unless you're medically exempt in certain areas of the site, or whatever that might be. But it can just be a very simple set of rules you can share with people. Think about the space you're using and think about how people journey through that space. Again, this could be front of house in a theatre, backstage, it could be a greenfield site, the same kind of things apply. And while you're sort of thinking about space and journeys, think about how you can minimise contact between people and how you can keep people apart as far as possible. And as I mentioned before, the thing in Exeter, complacency, just keep an eye on people falling back into old habits. It is difficult and it's not easy. It's not a nice way of working necessarily with face coverings and gloves and sanitizing your hands frequently, but it is clearly an important thing. So just keep an eye out for people slipping back into old ways. And finally, give yourself enough time. The more time you give yourself, as I said, to do a build, to do a sound check, to rehearse, anything like that, the more time you give yourself, the more chance you have to keep people separate. And that's it. I hope it's a quick dash through. I hope you found that useful. If there's any sort of questions on that, of course, be happy to pick them up in the Q&A.
Cool. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you. That was really, really helpful, really, really useful. I'm going to hand over to Tamar and Joe now to talk about their experiences of creating doorstep dances. Over to you.
Unmute, there we go. Hi everyone, I'm Tamar. I am wearing bauble earrings and have blonde hair and blue sparkly eyeshadow on.
Oh, and I'm Jo, and I have pink eyeshadow and pink sparkly cheeks and some sort of weird round thing on my head. We've been performing this afternoon, so we both look a bit interesting.
And we've got one after this, so we
stayed in costume. We don't just always dress like this.
Hello everyone. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about who we are in case you don't know. We are Tamar and Jo. We're a dance company based in Hull, and we've known each other for quite a few years, but we set up as a company about 3 years ago. And generally we choreograph work together that we both perform in as a duo, but we also make work with emerging dancers, and we have an interest in working with communities. So for example, we made a show for Freedom Festival in 2018 called Unseen Beings, which had a cast of community participants. Our general style is rooted in contemporary dance. We're both trained in contemporary dance. But as we've sort of developed our style over the past 3 years, we've drawn on elements of physical theatre and different dance styles as well. A big part of our work is costume and costume design, and we're interested in using costume to influence the work. So it's not, we don't make work that's then costumed at the end. Often we'll work with a costume designer that their design informs the choreography. So that's a little bit about us. I'm going to pass over to Jo, who's going to tell you about our COVID project, Doorstep Dances.
So Doorstep Dances was born in the summer in response to COVID. So we started talking about what to do because we just received from some Arts Council funding for a project where I was making a piece of work on Tamar, a solo performance piece. And we obviously, that couldn't happen. At the beginning, we couldn't even see each other. We were completely separated. And then when we were allowed to start seeing each other again, we decided that we wanted to make some physical work that we could take out and still bring to community so that we could still engage with our audiences. So it sort of came from the desire to still get out there and perform, but also from we made a surprise performance for one of our best friend's birthdays, Michelle D, who we can see on here, and we took this surprise performance round to her house, and we realized that there was potential for actually turning it into a proper project. This piece that we choreographed for Michelle we choreographed it in about an hour in Tamar's back garden to Erasure, and we just went round and did it. But we realized that there's actually something in the idea. So we formed a pilot, and we did a pilot project, and we wanted there to be some sort of audience choice or interaction. So our initial idea was for people to choose a song, and then we'd choreograph to the song and bring them the dance, which was a lovely idea, but we realized really soon that it was very time consuming. So what we decided to do in the end was make a menu. So we had a menu of 5 dances, and we tried to make the dances really different to each other, quite accessible, and a real mix of styles. So we had a Northern Soul dance, we had a contemporary dance to the Beatles, a couple of Beatles songs which had a bit of a LGBT sort of narrative to it. We had a really sort of poppy commercial dance to I Feel Love by Donna Summer. We had a disco dance, but we did it to Motorhead's Ace of Spades, so that was a bit of a kind of quite a funny tongue-in-cheek sort of dance. And we also had, what was the other one? We had another dance anyway, another contemporary one. So we had a real mix of stuff, and like Tamar said, we have a real strong focus on costume, so each piece was visually really different, the aesthetic was really different for each one, and we did it all on a shoestring and sort of last minute, so there was no massive collaboration or anything, but we made sure that each piece had its own visual style with costume. So we realized really quickly that it was a very, very popular idea. So we didn't expect it to kind of take off in the way that it did. So when we did the pilot, we did a performance for a sort of a friend / social media follower. And she shared a video of the dance that we did for her outside her house. So we literally just turn up with our own speaker, all COVID safe. We stand at the end of their garden or on the street or somewhere outside in a safe space. And perform the dance. And she shared the video on social media, and immediately it started getting loads of really positive comments and people asking how they could get a dance and all sorts. So it sort of partly promoted itself, but it also got picked up by BBC Radio Humberside, who worked with us to make a promo video, which they shared on their social media. We also got invited to go on the radio and talk about it. We had a piece in Hull Daily Mail and on Hull Live. Was there anything else? Yeah, it just sort of took off really, really well. I think it captured people's imaginations because it was something that nobody else was doing. And it was something that still enabled us to get out there. And because it was so visual, when people shared it, people could immediately see what it was and sort of imagine them having their own dance. So we did a crowdfunder, and we worked with local artist Anna Bean, who's also on here, Blue Beanie, and she designed some wonderful merchandise for us, which we gave away as part of a reward system for the fundraiser. So we sort of scrambled it together, but it had such a positive response. We decided to think about bringing it back next year. Also, we had a couple of organisations from outside of the region contact us who'd heard about it and ask us about booking it for next year. So, oh yeah, Michelle D's got a t-shirt on. I don't think everyone can see everyone, but for those who can see Michelle D, that's me and Tamar, and that's in another one of that's in the work that we were making before pre-COVID, when we were allowed in theatres. So we're planning to do the project again next year, and because we've had this interest from other organisations from different regions, we've started sort of looking at partnering up with them to work with artists in their region to upskill them, to do some sector development, and then they'll kind of set up their own version of doorstep dances in their region. So we're doing a bit of an exchange as well. We're sort of sharing the idea so it kind of reaches more people than we can reach just by ourselves. So go on to that bit about
So I just wanted to share some of the insights that we had around the project, really, and our plans for moving forwards. I think as independent artists, it felt really, really refreshing and empowering to just be able to be like, right, we're just going to do this project. We got a little bit of funding from Hull City Arts, and we did the crowdfunder ourselves. We did all the promotion and the publicity ourselves. And it just felt great not to have to like rely on an institution or an organization. And, you know, obviously a lot of people were furloughed from the venues. And so you wouldn't get an email back or whatever. So it just, yeah, it felt really empowering to be like, right, we're just going to do it anyway, no matter what. So that's something that's quite exciting. I think this dynamic between artists, producers and venues, I hope and I believe that we're going to see a real shift in how these relationships kind of happen in the future. Sorry, I was just going to say that we found some really exciting new partners in Hull, and we've partnered with more grassroots sort of community organisations. So today we went to a neighbourhood market off Hessel Road down Boulevard, and it's just brilliant. We've like made this really beautiful partnership with the Bite the Biscuit neighbourhood market, they're called, and they've been so supportive in sort of promoting our work and giving us a platform to perform at the market. And we're just really excited about using these really sort of grassroots organizations going forwards. So it just feels like it really fits with our ethos and how we want to work.
I was just going to add to that it actually felt really I know that a lot of people have really struggled, and I don't say that I really acknowledge that while saying this, but I actually feel for us COVID's been quite a positive thing, because a lot of the organisations and venues and companies, they bring in big companies from outside of Hull, and the little Hull companies don't often get a look in. And I feel like with this, because we've not had any of that, we've not had Freedom Festival or big fancy things going off in the town centre or in the different areas, it's really allowed us to have our voice heard and for us to just do something and be recognised, and that's actually been it's been a positive thing for us. So I think people are really receptive to it, and I think it's made us work in a way that is a bit more accessible, and just thinking, what are people going to want to see? And by doing that and almost putting the promotion of it into people's hands through social media, it's just really took off, and it's given us a lot of optimism for making work going forward. Even aside from COVID, even when things go back to normal, we'll still carry on working in this way, partly because it's highlighted how many people are actually isolated and have such a massive amount of barriers to accessing the arts, and this feels like it's really got under the skin of that and figured out how to reach those people. So yeah, it's something that we're going to carry on with regardless. Yeah, sorry.
I think we'll stop now.
Yeah, I just realised we've gone like a minute over, so sorry.
Okay, you're all good. Thank you so much for that. That's really, really exciting about do you know what I mean, sort of realising the opportunity of the opportunities and that idea of access and that idea of, do you know what I mean, reaching people people because you can get out there, whereas like other like larger organisations sometimes struggle with that. Which feels very fitting to go to Alex Bradshaw from Opera North to talk about some of the work that they've been doing over the summer. So handing over to you, Alex.
Thank you. Thanks, Madeline. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Bradshaw from Opera North, and I have got very messy lockdown hair tied back. I've got a green shirt on, but it looks black on the screen, and I'm in a very messy bedroom, so I apologise for all of those things. Yeah, so I work for Opera North, which is obviously a large organisation, and this sort of last 9 months has been a fascinating journey for us, in a sense, with a lot of the company on furlough, especially over the summer. The few of us that were actually around found ourselves working in really, really different ways, and working, turning things around very quickly and sort of responding to the changing circumstances that were happening in the country at the time. So the first thing that I was going to talk about was our small scale opera that we managed to tour in the summer, Hansel and Gretel. The picture you saw just a minute ago was the gorgeous Claire Pascoe as the witch, and the mother. She turns from the mother into the witch throughout the show. She is absolutely fantastic. So we decided in July that we needed to put on a show and we needed to take some music to some people. We hadn't done anything since the lockdown in March. This was the first thing we managed to stage. Yeah, it is. It's the Holbeck at Slunglow in Leeds. It was that was our dress rehearsal, and you can see there the sort of little gazebo thing that we put up, and quite small underneath there you can see our accompanying musician Milosh, who's playing the accordion. The ultimate portable orchestra. Doesn't require anything other than a chair for him to sit on, and it turns out some plastic screens to protect him from the wind, because his fingers nearly froze, even though it was the middle of summer. Sorry, I've sort of probably lost my thread a little bit there. So Hansel and Gretel, we wanted to put something on that was suitable for everybody. We wanted to get some music out there. We really quickly reached out to lots of venues and organisations to see who was up for hosting some performances, and we found that lots of people were. Obviously, we were doing this outside, and we rehearsed it at Slunglow at the Holbeck, and as I said, that's a dress rehearsal in the car park there. So we went to various different places, from car parks and community centres. We went to a refugee centre in Halifax, to their garden. We went to various sort of larger outdoor venues, Ushaw House near Durham. We came over to Hull and we did performances at stage at the Dock, which was brilliant, and lots of other places. And we just were overwhelmed by how popular it was, and how quickly tickets sold. Quite a lot of the things that Chris was saying earlier really sort of rang true for me. We put in place lots of measures, and what you were saying, Chris, about time and space and needing more of both of those things than you think you're going to need, absolutely rang true. So we created a COVID safety statement, which we put online for our audiences, and that said what we expected of the audiences, and also all of the things that we'd put in place to keep them safe. And they included things like the booking procedures. All booking was done online, with e-tickets and no contact. Even the situations where we didn't sell out in advance, we didn't allow anybody else to come along on the day. We kept the audiences really small, although it was outside, and in most places the space was sort of unlimited, as it were. We did keep the audiences small, and anywhere where it was more enclosed, we kept them very small to make sure that we had good distance between the, and we also used the word pods, Chris, between the pods that we set out for people. And people asked me constantly, what are these pods? And I said, they're nothing really. They're some little cones that we're going to put out to mark the areas. They're not really actual real life pods. So we used small cones to mark out the areas. We had lots of staff on hand, usually with little high-vis jackets, to direct people where they needed to be and make sure people felt safe, to remind people to use hand sanitizer, to remind them to stay away from each other and stay within their pods. The shows themselves were very short, and that was deliberate, to keep people, so that we didn't need to worry too much about things like toilet access and things like that, because they're only coming along for a 30 to 40 minute show. We kept the time between the shows longer than we normally would, to make sure that one audience had left and really moved away from the area before another audience would start to arrive. In terms of sort of COVID safety, I've had lots of conversations with people about what we did to make audiences safe. And I think one of the biggest things for me was making what we had done really visual and obvious, and sort of giving those visual cues to people that we were thinking through all of these things. So, whereas we could have just grouped chairs together 2 meters apart from each other, marking out those areas with cones, I think really gave people the confidence to know that they were safe from the next group of people and that kind of thing. Having the statement online, having a welcome spot when they came, where we were encouraging people to use hand sanitizer. We had masks available if people wanted them, and that kind of thing. I think those things really made people feel like they were being kept safe. One of the additional things that meant that we needed to have lots of time was obviously people were coming in and sitting on chairs, and we had to clean all of those things in between each performance. So there was that cleaning protocols and things like that in place, which you know, you have to think through, and you have to give yourself enough time to deal with. I think the biggest thing I think we learned was to expect the unexpected, which I think is something that we've, you know, all year long. The rules have been changing every 5 minutes, and keeping on top of that, and being able to respond to that, and being kind of fleet of foot and light and able to kind of change what you're doing in response to that, I think is really important. One instance, I think, which is probably useful to share, where I think we lost our control of audience distancing, was when the weather turned really suddenly. And that was, we were at the Lowry over in Salford, and we were performing on the back service road of the Lowry, which is probably the most glamorous place I've ever been to. But it was, the weather suddenly really changed. And although we were prepared for weather, we had umbrellas for audiences. The cast had coats and umbrellas sort of built into their costumes and things like that. And we weren't going to stop for any kind of weather. Everything was weatherproofed. The rain really, really bounced down very, very quickly. And it was extremely heavy. You couldn't hear the singers. You couldn't hear anything. So we decided to stop, and we paused to wait for the weather to pass. But at that point, all of the audience got up, and they moved under a neighbouring overhang to get away from the weather, and we couldn't stop them. And they all sort of clustered together under this kind of area of safety. And we sort of lost social distancing at that point. So we quickly kind of made announcements, had people move apart, made sure people were putting masks on and things like that. But it was something that we hadn't foreseen. We hadn't foreseen people acting like that and not kind of following the boundaries and the rules that had been put in place because of the weather. So it's just something to think about, I think. It was a really wonderful experience. I think it was absolutely brilliant to be able to put shows on and tour to places and meet audiences, and feel like we were doing something really positive and good at a time when not very many people were able to do that. So yeah, it's definitely worth persevering and worth doing. My job at Opera North, I look after sort of our family-friendly arts, and I also look after a programme of work called Lifelong Learning. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about this digital project that we did as well. So this is called From Couch to Chorus. And this was conceived in the summer. And we decided that there were lots and lots of people that we knew that go to choirs, sing in all kinds of different community choirs of different levels, and they were really missing them. And we wanted to put something on for people over the summer where they could learn to sing some opera in a really fun way online. So we set up this project called From Couch to Chorus, and we said we were going to take people from beginners to being part of an opera chorus in 4 weeks. We ran 4 sessions a week over those 4 weeks for tenors, basses, sopranos and altos, and taught the groups some opera choruses. And at the end we had a culmination session where everybody joined in and sang together, although not together because they were on Zoom, and as you know, you can't really do that on Zoom. You have to kind of have everybody on mute. But one of the biggest revelations for us was just the number of people that signed up and the geographical spread of people that signed up. We were thinking, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had maybe 100 or 200 people sign up to this and from different places? And we had nearly 2,000 people sign up, which was just amazing. It was all set up as pay as you feel, so nobody had to pay any money if they didn't want to. They could donate at any time they wanted to donate. And I think we received more donations for Couch to Chorus than we've had for anything else this whole time. And it was so successful. We ran a second project leading up to Christmas called the Festive Edition, which actually ended on Monday. And the biggest thing we did differently for that course was we had a culmination session where we had our wonderful chorus of Opera North performing live from the town hall in Leeds, socially distanced and all really well managed, but we streamed it into Zoom so that people could sing along with the chorus and sing some Christmas carols as well as the things that they'd been singing. We had a big screen up in the town hall so that the chorus on the stage could actually see all the participants as well. And this is just a screenshot from some of that. And the feedback we've had from the project has been incredible. You know, it's given us a lesson really in how many people we can reach if we embrace the digital aspect of things. I think we've been scared to as an organisation, maybe not had the skills, not wanted to try out something new. And I think, you know, having it forced upon us because of the situation, I think has been an absolutely eye-opening and brilliant experience. And I've probably gone over my time, Madeline, sorry.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you. It's really nice to hear both sides of it. I mean, in terms of like working digitally versus sort of trying to create live events and sort of the challenges that both of them are providing. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Jessica. Well done. Sorry, they've got a lovely round of applause happening in the cameras. So thank you so much. And then I want to hand over to Jessica Elmal from a visual artist sort of perspective. So over to you, Jessica.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Jessica. I have brown curly hair and I've changed my background to be a like starry, multicolored starry night kind of scape because I had a really boring cream wall. So I just thought I'd spice things up a bit for everyone. So yeah, as Madeline said, I'm a visual artist and my work's predominantly interested in the links between ecology, migration, climate justice, and I tend to explore those themes through participatory projects, so with community groups, lots of co-curation, and they usually manifest in some kind of multimedia installation or physical. Yeah, it was always very rooted in the physical. So when the first lockdown happened, and we didn't really know how long it was going to go for, so we was all kind of, you know, just like taking it slow and enjoying our time. And I distinctly remember everyone baking banana bread. Does everyone remembers that? Well, I can't bake, so I was like, crap, what am I going to fill my time with? So I decided to get in touch with a friend I knew that could code and decided to teach myself to code and started teaching myself how to kind of create my own website. And this really gave me a good foundation for starting to think about how to take my work online as we realized that this was going to go on longer than what we'd hoped for. I really wanted to start thinking about how to do visual art justice online. So I just want everyone to like take a minute, just like close your eyes and think of like a really great art show that you saw like last year or sometime. Like think about the experience of the building, walking in the room, the atmosphere, what can you hear, what can you smell? And how do you take all those feelings and then that whole experience and put it on an online space? Like it just, how can you recreate that feeling of awe? So when I close my eyes, I think of maybe like a Rothko painting that's like huge. Oh, my arms disappear when I do that. A Rothko painting that's like really big on the wall, and you sit with your neck up, and you just get lost in the colours. Or and then if you think about an online gallery where like a website that you click through and things are very small, it just doesn't correlate. So I started to think about this more and more, and a really good resource for anyone wanting to think about digital art is Rhizome. And I was lucky enough to attend a talk with their artistic director, Michael Connor. And he has this great diagram where he explains like traditional art, you have the artwork that's created by the artist that's viewed by the viewer. And that's like the standard of how to experience art. And he was saying that to think about the online sphere, you have to think about completely subverting that diagram. So what is that? Is there a way for the audience to be the artwork, or is there a way for the context, which is the online context, to be part of the audience, and vice versa? So The first digital work that I created was called Visions of a Future, which was an online archive which mapped people's ideas for the future, the kind of conversations we was all having about how we wanted our cities to progress after this lockdown. And so rather than just being an artwork in itself, it's a growing archive. There's a submissions form where people can submit their own visions to the archive, and then there's also the map which people can physically go along to view. So I'm just gonna put the link in the chat for everyone to have a check out if they wish. Yes, that was my first attempt at creating something that wasn't just something that you could look at. It's something that you could move around, as maybe you can move around in a space, and something in which the audience could become the artist by submitting their own works. The other digital project which I've started with Signal Film and Media and Grisdale Arts up in Cumbria is called The Digital Forest, and it's looking at how non-Western narratives to do with nature can improve all of our connections to it. So really breaking down what alternative ways of thinking or experiencing nature exist in the world, and kind of amplifying those voices, particularly voices from the global south. So for this, we've connected with a group of participants, and it was really key to get the participants to the forest. And just as we'd had everything planned, Cumbria was in tier 2, so it was like good to go. The second national lockdown happened, and we was just about to cancel the whole thing. And we realized a loophole in that you were allowed to walk as 2 people, like one person and one person can go on a walk. So I was like, right, it's fine. Every participant can come one at a time, and I'm going to walk with them and then run back to get the next participant. And obviously, in theory, that works really well. And it was such a great, lovely day. But also, it's very tiring, meeting participants one at a time and walking a 2-hour hike around the forest. But it was so worth it. And it's just, I think what I learned from that was that there are always rules, and we want to 100% ensure that everyone is safe, but the rules can sometimes work in your favor. And one of the benefits of that was that I got this amazing quality one-on-one time with each participant, really got to know them, got to know their interests and their values. And then the following workshops are all going to be on Zoom, but because we've had that one-to-one connection, I think it's really improved our trust and our ability to come from a place of a shared place, a shared experience. And the project is going to be, it's going to culminate in an online resource so that anyone can go on and hopefully feel the benefits of the forest through this digital platform and through the 5 senses. So the platform's going to have on things that you can see, things that you can hear, things that you can touch, things that you can taste and smell. And we're also collaborating with the libraries in Cumbria to create a reading resource that anyone in Cumbria can go and access any of the books suggested by the people in the group that focus on climate justice and food justice that are written by people of colour. So that's another example of how we can think of art as not being just the artist who makes the artwork that is then viewed, but as a more multidisciplinary and just having more avenues for experience than just that traditional way. And I think that is all from me. I think that was about 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Jessica. That was really really informative about thank you so much, and give you a round of applause from this end. It's so informative about how just adapting, how your practice has adapted, but also kind of thinking about, I don't know, and I don't know whether Tamar and Joe could talk about this, but sort of the labor intensive when you're having to rethink about how you're engaging with audiences, particularly. What we're going to do now, if it's all right with everybody, is I'd like to kind of open it up to the floor. And I also want, so if you're very happy to share your lovely videos and faces, that would be absolutely gorgeous. And yeah, and sort of open it up to any questions that are kind of coming, that maybe have come up during those presentations. And the other thing, I just kind of wanted to also say hello to some of the other amazing artists that we have in the room. So we have Annie Kirkman, who's in the room with us today, who's waving, who also kind of led a digital project during lockdown of SheFest. So it'd be lovely to, perhaps if you wanted to share some of the stories from working digitally. We've also got, I think we've got Sarah Penny in the room as well, from the Roaring Girls, who've just been doing things like R&Ds in lockdown. And I think we've also got lovely Charles Huckvale in the room, who did a really interesting project down Ella Street around Halloween, if that's right. But I'm sort of opening it up for, it'd be lovely to hear, do you know what I mean? Like I think one of the interesting things has been this kind of hybrid approach between kind of creating live events and the sort of the challenges of creating live events versus creating work digitally, and what are the challenges there. And I suppose what I'd really love to do is maybe ask, in terms of what do we, rethinking the question there, I've got into a tangent. In terms of, I'm going to open it up to Chris actually to begin with. What were the kind of the main challenges of working in a hybrid sense, of kind of creating work that's happening, that's streamed, but also live?
Thanks, Madeline. I mean, thinking about the project we did together, you know, we set out with the idea that, great, let's stream this live. And then you suddenly realise that, you know, we don't have a decent Wi-Fi coverage where we were. We did some testing. I think you remember the night we walked around with our phones trying to stream, and we realised that, of course, it depends what network you're on, because it was very patchy, you know, and O2 would work here and EE would work there and Vodafone would work there, and we were actually streaming from phones. And because we were doing you know, a cost-effective version, we learned a lot about, oh, you can't just say it's fine, we've got 4G, we'll use our phones. So on a very practical level, there's a bit of research to do about, you know, do the things work as you expect. I think it's also about creating a work that, actually, sorry, I'll start again. There's been a lot of streamed theatre over the year, and a lot of streamed activity from a lot of organisations, which has been fantastic. But I mean, although I work primarily in outdoor events now, my background is very much in theatre, and I spent sort of 20 years doing that. I always find when you get a streamed piece of theatre where somebody has pointed a camera at the stage and then streamed it, I find it very unsatisfying, because you miss that shared experience of being in a room with a whole load of people. And, you know, Jessica, when you said close your eyes and think about a gallery, weirdly I was thinking about Rothko as well. But experiencing these is so much more than looking at them. And I think the same goes for theatre and lots of other forms of entertainment. So it's about how to make that meaningful for the online audience as well as the in-person audience. And that was going back to university as well. We decided that we would live stream the concerts, the gigs, because we knew that some people wouldn't be able to attend. So we treated that as a separate thing altogether. And instead of just, you know, here's a camera or two, we did like a 6-7 camera multi-shoot, which was mixed in a separate studio completely separately. And that became a live stream concert, not a concert that was having a camera pointed at it. So yeah, I'm rambling a bit, but I think it's about thinking about the experience of that audience rather than just show. It's like, for those of you who are, you know, old enough to remember Bullseye, it's like, here's what you could have won, is not a, you know, a valid experience for an audience. So you know, think about their experience.
Fantastic, thank you, Chris. And Tamar and Joe, I know that you've done a live stream in the sort of the last 24 to 48 hours. How has that experience been for you?
It was lovely how it was set up. So it was your mate, wasn't it, that
Yeah, my
booked
best
it?
friend who lives in London, she has a brother who has Down syndrome, and he goes to a performance group called Northern Stars up in Stockton, near where she's from. And she asked if we could do a live stream doorstep dance for that group. So we said, well, why don't we just do a live stream that anyone can access, but dedicate it to that group? So I think for us, although the reason we set up doorstep dances in the first place was because we wanted to have face-to-face interaction and perform live to people, that it actually felt really nice because it came about so naturally, and it was requested and it was dedicated to somebody. So it felt like, like before we actually started performing, we made sure that the people that we were performing it to were actually there, and they said hi and, registered their attendance or whatever. And so it actually felt really nice. And it was like we were kind of, we felt, well, every single performance that we've done has been hugely different in terms of how we've interacted with the audience. So for example, we had one last week where there was a very, very small girl, and she came and stood really close to us, not too close to make it COVID unsafe, but she stood quite like closer than a normal audience member would in that situation. So it was sort of almost like a 1-to-1, 2-to-1 performance just for her, and we adapted to that. Whereas then we've had other performances where we had one for sorry, I've gone on to talking about live performance, but I will go back to what you asked. But we did one last week for a residential setting, and it was a block of flats where older people lived, and we actually performed in the back garden, and they watched from the windows because they were unable to come outside. So all of the interactions been really different. So when we were performing the live stream yesterday, it just felt like a different way of interacting. So we still really interacted with the camera, and yeah, I think it really made a difference knowing who was there and who we were performing it for.
One thing I'd sort of say though was that like the quality of the live stream wasn't great. So it's kind of like it worked, but it's not really something that we really want to focus on, because it does feel like quite hard work, like doing technical stuff.
Yeah, I think it just I think because we've got every element, like Tamar said before, we've done every element of setting up this performance and whatever, so we've got all of that. So then the live thing feels quite sort of easy and natural because that's what we do. But then setting up the online thing, it just felt like one more additional thing to do. So I think what I'd say is, just if you are going to do that, make sure, sorry, my kitten's trying to touch the laptop, just make sure you've got some sort of maybe technical support if possible to help you with that sort of thing, or just get savvy with it yourself. And I'm sure there probably would have been a way to make the video quality better yesterday if we'd sort of had time to look into it. But it's almost like, if you just do online, then you can really focus on getting that right. And if you just do live, you can really focus on getting that right. But so we're doing the latter. So then doing online stuff as well, it's like it's like a very different thing to have to get your head around. So yeah, I do think there are difficulties in doing both, but in a performance and engagement sense, it worked for us.
No, I agree. I mean, it is one of those challenges, isn't it, in terms of like trying to almost span that digital world and the live world as well. I just wanted to kind of invite Annie from She Productions, like because were there any kind of live elements of She Fest because I know that you did that festival digitally?
Yeah, it was a massive learning curve, and there's so much we wouldn't do again, and there's so much that we got from it. I think one of the main kind of positives was being able to reach people that we wouldn't normally, they wouldn't necessarily come to East Riding Theatre in Beverley to join us for something. So especially workshops and some of the Q&As we kind of got more engagement than we normally would, which was amazing. We didn't do anything live. It was in July. We'd just come out of lockdown, and we just didn't. We didn't know. We didn't really have an option. and we did that. We did our cabaret nights in the theatre, which were really fun, and we did what we could, but kind of echoing what Tamar just said, it was, we're not, you know, we're not technicians. We had some support, but it was literally a phone, and you know, we were lucky enough to have some technical support to have lights and make it look a bit more kind of, yeah, elevate it a bit more, but that was really it. And it was really strange because it was just one person on their own in a theatre talking to nobody, so it didn't have the same experience. But I would definitely say next year we're hoping to do the festival again, and one thing we'd really like to do is be able to think about this hybrid idea and what did work, which is being able to offer some of the events online as well to those that might not be able to come, might be further afield, might be for other reasons, and see how that works and respond to that. Well, respond to the ones that worked in that way the best, I suppose.
Thank you. That's really, it's really helpful. It's really amazing to be able to pull all the kind of the stories and experiences from this entire group. So thank you so much for sharing. Has anybody, I know that Sarah from the Roaring Girls, you've done R&D kind of looking in that kind of hybrid sense. Is there anything that you would like maybe want to kind of share in terms of, like, you know, the challenges of even sort of developing a project or thinking through a project, both live and digital?
Yeah, so for us, we were really lucky that we managed to get some funding to start the R&D for our new show. And with the Roaring Girls, we work in a really sort of collaborative way, and our work is devised, and it means that we're often in the same room together, playing games, singing stupid songs, hugging each other, crying, sharing stories, and that sort of vibe, which obviously COVID buggered that up, so that was fun. So originally we tried to do it online, so much like this over Zoom, and we were working with musical directors for the first time, so that was another challenge, trying to work with musical directors over Zoom and try and sing with them, and it was a whole thing, but we learned a lot from that. And I think what really worked for us was a process that we can now integrate into our physical working, which is coming together with the musical directors and sharing ideas and having a play, and then going off and we write stuff, they write stuff, and then we come back. And that's something that we don't think we would have necessarily explored had we have just been working in a physical capacity. We did manage to get into a room together for part of the R&D process for, I think it was 1 or 2 weeks, which was in the summer, where we had that ability to get into a room in working environments. And that came with a lot of, you know, a health and safety policy, a big COVID risk assessment, and that was passed through our board, and our board checked it. And, you know, we checked it with lots of different people that we know who are brilliant at lending an eye and just reading over everything to make sure that we covered it all. But I think one of the most important things that we learned, which is something that we try to do in all of our processes, is the well-being of people is at the forefront of everything that we do, which means we always have check-ins at the start of every rehearsal, before every performance, every meeting. And, you know, the pandemic and coronavirus really making a lot of people anxious and really nervous, and making sure that we were taking care of people's well-being as well as their physical safety was really important to us as well. So we made sure we provided lots of guidance on that, and had counselling sessions as part of our R&D process as well, which we always have. So yeah, I think one of the big things to take away is people's well-being, as well as their physical safety, but massive learning process. And if anybody ever wants to have a look at our COVID policy for working in the same room in a rehearsal or anything like that, then let me know. I'd be happy to share that.
So thank you so much for that. I mean, I think that's one of the key things going forward, isn't it? It's about how do we navigate not only artists' like safety and sort of how people feel working in these situations, but then also how audiences feel. I don't know, Alex, would you, like, in terms of the experience of both touring to the different areas, like, did you have to negotiate did you have to negotiate sort of a changing spectrum of people's kind of feelings, and how did you kind of safeguard for that?
Yeah, I guess the biggest differences we found was with the different venues that we went to. So the managers and the people that were running the different venues all sort of needed to have different conversations to be reassured about the safety of what was happening. Some people were like extremely enthusiastic right from the get-go and happy to talk about anything and sort of share that journey with us, and others needed more persuasion, needed more things to be in place, needed to consult with more people. So we obviously had risk assessments galore, and they varied depending on the venue that we were going to, obviously, because you know, all the risks that were there before COVID are still there, so you still have to negotiate the risks of all of the venues that you go into, as well as adding the kind of COVID risks on top. And in fact, the COVID risks were different depending on venues as well, depending on the size and the space and the route in and the public access and things like that. I touched on performing at the Lowry in the on the service road, and what we'd wanted to do was perform in the I don't know if people have been to the Lowry, but there's a great plaza out the front, and it's really cool, and we wanted to perform on there, but it belongs to Salford Council, and they were really concerned that people would gather and that we wouldn't be able to manage the non-ticketed audience, people kind of stopping and watching, and that they would all gather too close together. And so we scratched that idea, and then we went round to the service road, and we could manage that space. So I think it was, we could block it off at either end and make sure that there was no public access. I feel like I veered away from the question. I can't remember what the question was. Oh.
It was talking about sort of dealing with audience, the idea of audience safety, and how almost you have to adapt, and especially when you're touring to different places, how that sort of changes the performance, or how that changes your planning around that.
I don't think it changed the performance necessarily. Not going to different places anyway. The whole nature of the situation changed the performance. The performers had to be socially distanced from each other. We had to be careful about what direction they were singing in, making sure that they weren't too close to the audience when singing, and all that kind of stuff, which was different. But I think that essentially stayed the same. For the different venues. I think the way we handled the audience changed slightly, depending on the route into the performing area. So there were some places where it was just a great big open green space, and people would just sort of arrive from different places, and in that situation we had to have members of staff with high vis on so that you could go and greet people and show them to the appropriate space for them to sit. There were other places where there's just one access point, and that was sort of easier to manage. We could put one-way systems in place and do that. There was one particular one in the back garden of a bar in Leeds, which was probably the most difficult to manage because people had to come through the inside area of the bar to come outside. So that was a bit of a tricky one-way system that we had to negotiate, and we had to have people put masks on to go inside and that kind of thing. But the venue were really great. They came and did at pod service, so they could take drinks orders and things and then deliver them to people so that they weren't clogging up the inside of the venue.
Wow, brilliant, thank you. And then I'm going to move this sort of the conversation. It's a question that I want to ask, I suppose, is that, and I don't know whether everybody in this room has experienced this, but the whole having to be fleet of foot, and this whole idea of having to be adaptable and having to have several plans in motion, and whether anybody in the room has any top tips of things that we could all be thinking about, or things that we've learned through this process, just because I know that obviously the world keeps changing in terms of second lockdowns, tier restrictions. It looks like we've got more of this to look forward to, and I just wondered if anybody would like to share any of their top tips in terms of trying to be fleet of foot, trying to be adaptable. And if you want to either put it in the chat or put a hand up, and I can call on the person. Yes, Chris?
I mean, it feels fairly obvious, but don't assume you know what the world's going to look like next week. You know, we've tripped up on that a few times, and I think, as you say, it's about being fleet of foot. As I said earlier, you know, we're working on shows next week that have one, two, or three different plans associated with them. You know, there was a local authority, it's not here, it's another part of the country, and I had a meeting with them, and they, I found quite surprisingly, was sort of taking the line of, right, you know, what is this show? What's the show you want to put on? And we said, well, you know, this show is in hopefully 9 months' time. So for us, we don't feel that's the time we need to make that decision. We do, for reasons of the show, we think we need to make that decision about next April. So as well as having your own plans on the go, I think sometimes you will come up against people who are not perhaps so welcoming of that having multiple strands of planning going at the same time. So I think sometimes there's a conversation to be had to explain to people why, you know, this is in the best interests of producing the best event we can, but also giving the confidence that you are considering all the angles, but now is not the time to make that decision.
Great, thank you, Chris. And Tamar and Joe, did you have your hand up before about being fleet of foot and coming up with several contingency plans and things like that?
Yeah, I had my hand up, but I've since then changed what I was going to say. But no, I'm going to stick to the original one. I was just going to say it's difficult because people don't want to be changing their practice or like changing too much to make everything super accessible. But something that we learned was that we just had to respond to this because we were making it practically accessible. We had to, the work had to kind of follow suit in a way a little bit to where the work had to be, it had to fit in with what people would want to see. Whereas usually, I guess we'd be making work and we'd be kind of thinking, we'd have an audience in mind, whereas this time the audience almost came first, and then I know that's how people advise you to make work anyway, but this time it was sort of like, it was even more shaped by the audience, and it was just, just being able to be really adaptable and think about, well, if we're going to be aiming to, this can reach anybody now, so we need to make work that would suit anybody. So it's just.
I think also like, we've got we're waiting on a decision from Arts Council for some funding for the project that we started before Doorstep Dances, that's Joe's like solo show that she's making on me, and that works a lot more experimental, and I think it's sort of like holding on to that stuff as well for us, like, so that we don't feel like we're, you know,
selling out,
we're completely selling out and just doing a sparkly Christmas dance. Like, I don't know, I think it's just holding on to like all aspects of your practice and your work.
And so next year when we do the hopefully do the bigger Doorstep Dances project, we're trying to sort of merge those two things. So we'll have a bit of a sliding scale of accessibility. So we'll maybe have the sort of menu of 5 dances, but one of the dances will be really, really super family friendly, accessible, cheesy, almost performance. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there might be something that's for more regular art or performance audiences that is more experimental. And I think that's a way that we've negotiated the current landscape, and just in a way that we can have that thing that we can take to anybody, but then still be able to keep our artistic integrity. So obviously it's a difficult one to give as advice because everybody's really different with the ways that they're going to be working, but that's just something that a way that we've managed to work around the just the sort of adapting to make things suitable for as wide a range of people as possible.
I suppose, like, I'm just kind of adding on to that, that's something about capacity as well, isn't it? About as artists and as makers, there's something about having to find ways to, I suppose, support creating more or creating work differently. Do you know what I mean? And I don't know whether Jessica, you want to kind of feed in on this, just in terms of going like, do we have any, like, I suppose, thoughts, tips, ideas about how we support building that capacity to kind of, you know, keep the artistic integrity of the things that we were building before, but then how do we also expand, and how do we kind of create even more opportunities to create work or reach people who haven't already been, you know, haven't had that opportunity to engage with work?
Yeah, I think something which I'm really keen on exploring more within my practice is the concept of like slow art. And I think for a lot of visual artists, it's very common that you would like get a bit of funding or get a commission or get a project, and it's like a 3-month turnaround, maybe 6 if you're lucky. And within that, there just isn't the time to, or the capacity to find these new ways of doing things or experiment. And so I think that's hopefully one thing that will come out of the pandemic, is that we as a society have had the chance to slow down and reflect, and that, you know, I mean, we can hope that that's something that is going to continue no matter how we, you know, as things progress and things hopefully get better. Hopefully that's going to be one of the things that stays, that we're going to have more time to do things so that we can do things thoughtfully and compassionately. And like someone mentioned before, I think it was Sarah, about the well-being of people, and I think that's something that when we're creating work or creating anything in this current time, the well-being of people really does need to be first and foremost, and no artwork is more important than people's health and safety and well-being. And so that's just something that I think needs to be mentioned. There's another concept that I just wanted to briefly touch on, which I thought was amazing for any other artists or freelancers in the room. It's an idea of a care rider. So you know how musicians, when they go to play a gig, they ask for a rider, which might be like 3 Smirnoff Ices and a bag of Cheetos. Well, it's this like concept that as like an artist or a freelancer, when you come to a new project or a new partnership, you have a care rider in there which details, you know, who you're going to talk to if things get tough, or how, you know, if you can take if you're going to have like 4 days across the project to have as a mental health day, if, you know, just all these things that are really good to iron out at the start of a project, but as freelancers we don't really have a HR department to go to, and blah blah blah, etc etc. So that's just something that I heard last week, and I was like, that's great, that is definitely something we should take forward.
Definitely. I mean, that's just with the Absolutely Cultured and Artist Support hat on, we're sort of gathering resources about access riders that a lot of artists are now thinking about. So if anybody's would like a template or a model, please feel free. It's like, that's Joe's hands going up immediately. So yeah, great, cool. If you email artistsupport@absolutelycultured.co.uk, I can email some templates out that we've been looking at, because I think the idea of, you know, looking after ourselves, looking at the best ways that we can work, is something that's been a really good thing to think about, that's come out of COVID and this sort of slow working. Does anybody in the room have any questions or any other kind of things that they would like to share? I'd just like to say a massive thank you to everybody who's sharing in the chat as well. Michelle, what would you like to ask or share?
Yes, I'm Michelle D. I'm wearing a white t-shirt with Tamar and Joe on it. Yeah, I wanted to highlight the online art club that Anna Bean, Blue Beanie, did right at the very beginning of lockdown, particularly for those of us who were in shielding. I went to shielding on March 17th, and I didn't come out until 4 months later, which is a long, long time to have your doorstep as your only friend. And Anna put on 13 art clubs every Sunday, and it gave me something to look forward to. It gave me a new art form to try out each time, because I challenged myself with the different themes. And during the 13 weeks, I wrote something, I drew something, I made an installation. What else did I do? I did some design. I did all these different art things that I would not have done if it hadn't have been for art club. So those kind of things, the people that moved very, very quickly when they realized that people were going to become so very, very isolated very quickly, I think they need a massive round of applause, because it's okay doing something in July, but that's 3 months into my lockdown. Cheers.
No, definitely. I think that's it's an interesting challenge, isn't it, about how to respond quickly. And I just want to also like reiterate everything that you said, Michelle, that the Anna Bean's Art Club was absolutely fantastic. And actually the fact that everybody was so up for trying or sort of developing practice and the ways that people adapted was absolutely wonderful to see. I suppose one of the questions I would love to ask everybody is, just because obviously I think there's a lot of fatigue out there at the moment. Like a lot of people talk about being zoomed out or, you know, uncertain about the future going ahead. And I just wondered if anybody in the room had any kind of top tips or ideas about how we can keep that energy or keep that adaptability, or whether we do have to maybe take a step back and maybe we have to be slower and we maybe have to think about mental health again. Was that your hand up, Jess?
Yeah, I think it's a great point that you just made about the Zoom fatigue, but also something which we all need to be aware of is the amount of digital exclusion that people face in this country. And I mean, obviously certain venues excluded quite a lot of certain types of people anyway, whether that be galleries, theatres, etc. But then when we move to an online sphere, that gap between who is able to access the work and who isn't is even wider. So it's something that we should all think about, not just in terms of people getting Zoom fatigue who are able to get on Zoom, but people who are on data packages. And like Zoom, I think, uses like a ridiculous amount of data if you're using if you've only got a phone at home. And so thinking about how we can do online or digital projects through less exclusionary means. So for example, we spoke earlier, Madeline, but like WhatsApp is like such untapped resource. I think it uses barely any data. Most people have it. In terms of languages, it's very easy to copy and paste into Google Translate. So that's an avenue that I've really utilized over lockdown, because of the kind of the groups and the people who I work with quite a lot. WhatsApp's been a real lifeline for us to stay active and stay connected without presuming that people have that everyone has the same access to things like Zoom or even a website.
Thank you, that's really helpful. Annie, you had your hand up.
I was just going to add to that, because I think that's such a good point. And I know that the Time Bank Hull and East Riding are working with a couple of organisations on a digital divide project. So if anybody is doing something digital and might need some kind of ideas of how to approach digital poverty and kind of get some resources for that, it's worth contacting Time Bank, because they've been looking at ways to get funding for data packages, as well as repairing devices and getting those out to people that maybe don't have that. So it's just worth noting that.
Lovely, thank you so much. That's really, really helpful. Tamar and Joe, you had your hands up.
She won't shut up.
Shut me up. Yeah, I was just going to say in response to your question of should we adapt and push forward or take a bit of time out and sit back and assess. I think it's really important to go with how you're feeling. We've ended up being really active with doorstep dances, but there was a bit that we were trying to do before that, where we were trying to carry on with a project that we literally got funding for on the 20th of March, and then we went into lockdown on the 23rd. And it started to feel really stressful, and we were doing we were separate, so we were doing remote stuff, and it actually felt really stressful. And in the end, I had to let go of some of that project and just go like, this isn't working. I just need to really like change the idea and let go of it. So I think as much as it's been good for us, I also think there was a period where we just needed to just step back and sort of like doorstep dances. That bit worked, but I think it's also important to remember that if at some point it starts feeling like it's not right for us, or we get overwhelmed, I think you've got to remember that the pandemic, it has an effect on everybody's mental health. So I think you have to just really check in with what's right at that time, rather than feeling like you should be doing this or you should be doing that. Just like to be really taking care of yourself. And another point quickly is just this is maybe not so relevant here, but it's just something that I've been feeling a lot. It's really important for organisations, I think, to follow along and set up opportunities for opportunities for artists to create work with them, so that they can partner with them and they can offer some of these. Like we were saying, we've done every part of this project ourselves. If we could partner with organisations, then that sort of takes some of that pressure off, and I think that really addresses the issue of mental health and well-being. And it also, maybe they sort of step into that little HR role that Jessica was saying. We don't have HR as freelancers, but I think partnerships can really provide some of that. So yeah, that's just a bit of an additional thought, really.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think it's that interesting thing, isn't it, where we all have to factor in everybody is going through this pandemic. And even like for both individual artists who need that support, and I mean, it is exhausting trying to get a project going and then keep going and keep adapting and keep adapting and keep adapting, to then also how do we work in partnership with other organisations who are in and out of furlough, who are also going through that pandemic, who are also got like, you know, 1 minute somebody's working, the next minute they're not, and then how do we all adapt towards that? I know we've seen so many organisations who, do you know what I mean, have been able to do a little bit of work and then they've been furloughed, and then it's sort of they become silent, and it's that really tricky negotiation, I think, that we've all got to factor in as we go forwards, of how do we find ways of supporting each other, how do we find ways of, you know, listening and hearing each other, I suppose, as well, because I know that when we did the caravan, do you know what I mean, I was hoping to go to larger organisations for support, but found that they were dealing with their own struggles. So it's an interesting one about how we go forwards. I'm very aware it's 5:30, so I just wanted to take this massive opportunity to say a massive thank you for being part of this discussion today. It's been so great to hear of everybody's projects. It's been brilliant to have the reminders in the chat about some of the brilliant work that's been going on all sides of things. We are hoping to do more of these sort of webinars about people sharing their experiences, sharing their learnings, hopefully doing some work on different facets and things like that. So if you would like to hear more about them, please do get in contact and follow Absolutely Cultured on the website, or you can get in contact with me directly through artistsupport@absolutelycultured.co.uk. We're also hoping that with all these webinars, we can start making a bank of resources so that people can watch these videos and can reflect on them, do you know what I mean, in terms of ideas and things like that. But I want to take this massive opportunity just to say thank you to Chris, to Tamar and Joe, to Alex, to Jessica, to Russia, who's been doing all the technical, and thank you all so much for being here today. Thank you so much.